So any questions? Anyone?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in last class when we were explaining 2-bit precision or 3-bit precision, that was not quite clear, sir. So if you could again explain that.
Number of bits that you retain, that you are sure that this is the number, that is called the precision. And single precision and double precision is the number of fractional bits that we have, isn't it? So 23 bits are used for the fractional part in single precision, and 52 bits are used for the fractional part in double precision. So as you can see, 23 bits, so we can have a certain number of, after all there are only 2 raised to the power 23 possible configurations. These are the numbers that can be stored in that one particular uh, range or one particular power of 2. Right? Similarly, in case of double precision, 2 raised to the power 52, these are the total possibilities that you can have between two consecutive powers of 2. And that is what allows you to have more precision in double precision representation, because you have simply because you have more combinations and more possibilities to store intermediate numbers. And single precision, you have less number of intermediate numbers. And that also, because you are not having more number, more representation, more possibilities, so obviously that has effect on how many 23 in binary representation. So that corresponds to, in equivalence in decimal representation, that corresponds to about 7 places of decimal. And 52 bits in binary, fractional part of 52 bits in binary, that corresponds to about 14 places of decimal in base 10 number system.
Sir, okay, it is. I got it. But when you were explaining unsigned decimal and excess k
Yes,
excess, so
yes.
in that k excess it is -2, -1. So how is all that coming? Means
Oh, that is shift of origin. Unsigned decimal starts from 0 and extends up to 2 raised to the power n, whatever number of bits you have. Right? So it will, for example, for 3-bit system, it will start from 0 and end up at 7. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 8 possibilities, 2 raised to the power 3. Now, if I want to use it for representing positive as well as negative integers, then the simplest way to do that is to define a new origin. So instead of starting from 0, I shift the 0 line from top to somewhere in the middle of the scale. Right? So I divide by number 2 the total possibilities, and I shift it by that margin.
okay, the excess k is showing us the shifting of origin. We
Yes,
shifted
so
0 to
that is
-2.
the offset. Excess k is the offset.
Okay,
That
okay.
is what I told you in the yesterday's lecture, that it is like a shifting of origin in coordinate geometry that we have all been doing so routinely.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so you can refer to this lecture slides on nature of numerical computation. It is, of course, I provided the link from academia.edu, but I guess I will replace this link with actual slides that I have, so that you can directly access it rather than going through academia.edu. That will, I'll arrange for that in when I edit this next time. So, continuing with our discussion, uh, I hope you understand now the intricacies of scientific computation. It's not as simple and easy as it seems. A lot of care and diligent effort is required to build uh, reliable, fast, and robust uh, algorithms and computer programs. Having said that, uh, recently I read a very interesting quote and I thought I would uh, just mention it here. When you talk of scientific computing, of course, everybody tries to make algorithms faster and quicker. But the bottom line remains that if your code does not work, it doesn't matter how fast it does not work. So basic, the first requirement is that you should get your code to work correctly. Speed is secondary to the correctness of result, and efficiency is also secondary to the correctness of the result. The first objective should always be to write something that will work correctly as expected, and that requires very careful understanding of the situation and uh, be alert for possible sources of errors in computation because of digital floating point arithmetic. I mean, mathematically, there may not be anything wrong, but because of the vagaries of floating point arithmetic, things can go horribly wrong, and you should be cautious against such possibilities. So, we now move to the next topic, which is very important for any approximation theory. It is very firmly rooted in the concepts of linear algebra, vector spaces and function spaces. So let us lay the groundwork by referring to something that everyone is familiar with. I hope everybody knows what is Euclidean space, vector space. Anyone who has not heard of this terminology, Euclidean vector space?
Sir, I don't know, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir, I also don't know, sir.
okay, fine. Nothing special about it, it's just a name. Three-dimensional vector space that we often refer to, that corresponding to x, y, z or unit vectors I, j and k, they are referred to as the Euclidean vector spaces. Right. So three-dimensional vector space is a Euclidean geometry, and any three-dimensional space can be, any point in three-dimensional space can be represented as a combination of position, that position vector can be represented as a combination of three orthogonal unit vectors directed along the coordinate directions. So I, j and k. So that's I mean, I'm sure all of you know the three-dimensional vector space. It's just that it is known as Euclidean vector space. So, vectors in Euclidean space, so this is what I was referring to, x, y and z. Any point position given by the coordinates x, y, z can be defined as a position vector r from the origin, starting from origin, pointing towards that point. Now, what does this position vector r do? So, position vector r, which is defined by the coordinates x, y, z, is essentially a linear combination of orthonormal base vectors. That is x times I plus y times j plus z times k. I, j and k, they are the unit vectors along x, y and z directions. So essentially, x is the scaling factor for unit vector I, y is the scaling factor for unit vector j, and z is the scaling factor for unit vector k. And if you add all these three together, then that is what gives you this particular position vector r. And if you look at it closely, pay attention to this diagram, this scaling factor x measures to what extent unit vector I participates in making r. So x is the projection of r along unit vector I. So it is given by the dot product of r with I. So if you take the dot product of this vector x, y, z with 1, 0, 0, that's the Euclidean unit vector, first Euclidean unit vector, you will get x. So that is what you have. And similarly, y is the projection of this position vector r along unit vector j, and z is the projection vector of r along unit vector k. So this triad of coordinates x, y, z, they are essentially the projection of unit vector, projection of position vector along respective unit vectors. And this set I, j and k constitutes a orthonormal basis. The basis is what we say in the sense that a set of vectors forms the basis when any vector in that space can be represented as a linear combination of those vectors. Right? So position vector r, any point, you would agree with me when I say that any point in this coordinate space, three-dimensional space, can be represented as a linear combination of I, j and k. So this is as general as it gets. There is nothing in this three-dimensional space that cannot be represented by an expression of this kind. And that is what when we say that these three vectors completely span the three-dimensional space. That means there is nothing in the three-dimensional space that cannot be represented by a linear combination of I, j and k. By linear combination, I mean each of these appear having powers of 1. So they are linear terms. Right? And they are orthonormal. First of all, orthogonal means their projection, mutual projection on each other is 0. So that this is a standard result. All of you would know that the dot product between I and j, the projection of I along j is 0, projection of j along k is 0, projection of k along I is 0. So that's what this dot product represents. And that's the ortho part of it. And the normal part of it is that they are all normalized to have unit length. So the dot product of these unit vectors with themselves, so I dot I, j dot j and k dot k is equal to 1. Right? So that is, so these, when these two conditions are satisfied, so that set of vectors are called orthonormal vectors. So orthogonal and normalized. And that's a very important property, very, very handy property that will that simplifies our job considerably. So any position vector r represented by x, y, z, it essentially represents a point P denoted by the coordinates x, y, z in three-dimensional Euclidean space. Right? And these Cartesian coordinates x, y, z, they are the projections of position vector r onto these individual orthogonal base vectors I, j and k respectively. That's what I explained a little while back. Now, you must be wondering why am I repeating this high school stuff. The reason is we are so familiar with this and we take it for granted that this is what it is, and now we extend this concept. I mean, this is the mathematical structure that we have established. Now this mathematical structure that we so routinely take for granted for three-dimensional space, the beauty is that it can be extended seamlessly to a hypothetical n-dimensional vector space. So any n plus 1 vector, so this vector of n number of elements, it can be considered as a linear combination of, again, Euclidean base vectors, so 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 and so on up to 0 0 0 0 0 1. So x1 multiplied by first Euclidean unit vector, x2 multiplied by second Euclidean unit vector, and so on, plus xn, the nth term, multiplied by nth Euclidean unit vector. So exactly identical to what we have for three-dimensional vector space, except that the dimension is more. And of course, we cannot visualize anything beyond 3 dimensions. So it is a hypothetical n-dimensional space. So it's an abstract concept, but mathematically, all operations that we define for three-dimensional vector space, they carry over seamlessly for n-dimensional vector space. So now this Euclidean base vectors that we have here, 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 1, etc., they are only one of the many, infinitely many such base vectors. These are of course the most convenient of them. For example, you may appreciate that just all of us have done this exercise. If I have a point P defined as xy, I can always define another frame of reference, x prime, y prime, and the coordinates of point P would be x prime, y prime, isn't it? Position, the point does not change. Point remains where it was in the space. But because the frame of reference is arbitrary, the user can choose whatever frame of reference he or she wishes. The coordinates are always with reference to this frame of reference. So this frame of reference, once you change this frame of reference, the coordinates of the points would accordingly change, right? So that is the whole, that is what the argument is. Euclidean base vectors are just one such set of frame of references. There are infinite such sets. For example, x prime, y prime, I can keep on rotating. I mean, there are infinite such orientations that I can have, and for each orientation, for each choice of frame of reference, there would be a corresponding set of coordinates which would define this particular point P in the two-dimensional space. So that is what we are referring to here, that linear combination of xi, ei is the unit vector, Euclidean unit vector, is just one of the infinitely many such possible decompositions. There can be several other possibilities. So just to drive home this point, let us say, is there any other way of breaking up an arbitrary vector? Let's just take again going back to three-dimensional vector space, just to make it easy for you to understand and relate it to three-dimensional vector space that you understand so well. The position vector x, that is given by the coordinates 4, 1 and -3. So their decomposition is of course 4 times E1, that is 1 0 0, plus 1 times 0 1 0, minus 3 times 0 0 1. So is there any other possibility of representing this position vector? So this is a position vector uh, R. So this is what we are trying to do is we are trying to define this position vector for some coordinates, and we are trying to find out is there any different possibility of oh sorry, this is the position vector. So is there any different possibility to define this position vector in terms of new frame of reference? So we define this along this one frame of reference, Euclidean frame of reference. Is there a possibility to define the same position vector, same point with reference to another frame of reference? And then the coordinates would of course be different. So let us approach this problem in the reverse order. Let us verify the identity. Does right hand side equal left hand side? So just try to calculate these numbers. Uh, do they add up, and does this equality hold? Can you check up? Just work out the top number or last number, whatever. 1.88 multiplied by 0.862 plus 3.62 multiplied by 0.433 plus 3.05 multiplied by 0.263.
It comes out to be 3.99.
3.99.
3.99. So to the working precision, this is as good approximation as we can have for 4. So the identity holds, right? So I can actually say that the coefficients 1.88, these coefficients 1.88, 3.62 and 3.05, they are the coordinates with respect to new set of base vectors, and these are the base vectors, new base vectors. So instead of referring to 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0 and 0, 0, 1 as the base vectors, which is what we call as Euclidean base vectors, we can alternately use these vectors as the base vectors, and with respect to these base vectors, these are the coordinates of that point is same. We are not changing the point. The position of the point in three-dimensional space is still the same. It is just that the frame of reference has changed, and with respect to this new frame of reference, new base vectors, the coordinates will also change. So these coordinates 1.88, 3.62, 3.05 refer to the same point, but with respect to new frame of reference given by these base vectors. Right? So we come to a very fundamental definition. A set of n number of vectors xi, I ranging from 1 to n, is linearly independent if and only if the summation, linear combination alpha I times xi, summation over I ranging from 1 to n, is equal to 0 in only one situation, when all the coefficients alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3 up to alpha n, they are all identically 0. So that is the only time when this linear summation would be 0. So if that does not hold, then the set of vectors is not linearly independent. So the implication is any set of n number of linearly independent vectors, it completely spans the n-dimensional vector space. That means, and this is a very very important statement with very deep implications. It means that any position vector in n-dimensional space or any vector in n-dimensional space can be represented as a linear combination of n number of linearly independent vectors. So orthogonality is a very stronger condition. A set of orthogonal vectors is of course going to be linearly independent, but not all linearly independent vectors are going to be orthogonal, right? So orthogonality is contained in this definition, but we do not need orthogonality. For example, uh, I don't know whether you have had any exposure to that. We normally, in our school, we studied coordinate geometry referring to orthogonal coordinate directions. But we can also have uh, same formulation, similar formulation when the coordinate directions are oblique to each other. So we are not looking at orthogonal coordinate direction x, y, and z. They are orthogonal to each other. Rather, we can have uh, one direction x oriented along some direction, and we may have y which is inclined at an angle of alpha to uh, x direction, and alpha may be anything, not necessarily 90 degree. And similarly for z direction, it can be anything inclined at any angle as long as it is not collinear, as long as it points to some new direction. And that is the key issue, that each coordinate direction should bring in some element of new information that is not contained in earlier uh, dimension, earlier direction. So as long as we have n number of linearly independent directions, so any n dimensional, uh, any vector, any arbitrary vector in n dimensional space can be represented in terms of these vectors. So that is the mathematical definition. It is possible to do so, but it is extremely difficult if the vectors are not orthogonal to each other. Orthogonality makes life much simpler, and that is why we refer to orthogonal directions. Okay. So now we can change. Vectors can be transformed with respect to different bases. So what we have seen here is this position vector x with respect to this coordinate basis. So 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 1. So this is the uh, uh, base vectors in Euclidean coordinate geometry multiplied by the coordinates, and this of course is a position vector, and this position vector is same as this position vector, I mean in this new basis. So these are the base vectors multiplied by the respective coordinates. So essentially what we are talking here is this A times x. So this is matrix X, linear transformation matrix X multiplied matrix A, and this is the coordinate vector x. So Ax in one frame of reference is equal to b times y in another frame of reference. And of course A and B, they are square matrices and positive definite. If these rows and columns, they are not independent, if they are not dependent, then of course the matrices are invertible. And by virtue of the fact that we have always insisted on independent basis, so these vectors are of course independent of each other. So then these are invertible, and then we can, that provides a basis that we can always change the coordinate uh, transformation. We can go from one coordinate system to another coordinate system by simple matrix operations. So change of basis can be effected by this linear transformation by simple this uh, equality Ax is equal to By. So the coordinate with respect to this frame of reference B can be obtained as B inverse A times X for this position vector. So that's a simple standard linear transformation. Now inverse computation is of course a very expensive job, and also involves lots of floating point operations. So I assume that you must have understood by now that the whole basis of the primary requirement of robust computation, scientific computation, is to minimize the floating point operation. If you can get to a result with a minimum number of floating point operations, that is always better. So it is always so inverse computation is always uh, the last thing that you would do. So whenever we say B inverse some vector, so that essentially refers to solution of simultaneous equations. And there are more efficient ways of computing solution of simultaneous equations than pre-multiplying by inverse of the matrix. And you will learn about those techniques uh, in the numerical methods course. अरे मेरी क्लास है, मैं बाद में मीटिंग ज्वाइन करूँगा. So, so inversion is always to be avoided, and the whole idea, the beauty of orthonormal or the choice of orthonormal basis is that inverse of the matrix is same as its transpose. So by one stroke, you have actually avoided the problem of computing inverse complete entirely. So if I if I wish, I can actually the solution, this y is equal to b inverse ax, can be computed by y is equal to b transpose ax if matrix B is orthogonal matrix, right? Orthonormal matrix. And that is what we will find out. I mean, this matrix that we have is indeed an orthonormal matrix. You can multiply by its transpose, and that will end up as a identity matrix. So linearly independent base vectors, although they are adequate, but they are not convenient because of this need of linear inversion or solution of simultaneous equation to effect this change of basis. Orthogonal vectors often lead to simpler mathematical models. It is much easier to analyze the problem by process of decomposition. I mean, you may refer to our vector analysis. It is much simpler to combine two vectors by first decomposing them into their respective constituents, then analyzing or adding, subtracting the respective constituents, and then uh, carrying out the combination again. So, establishment of an orthogonal basis is a logical but expensive operation. So, it's not, it's easier said than done that orthogonality makes life simpler, but development or construction of an orthonormal basis itself is an expensive operation. So, uh, so it is not a very what should I say, complete pass. I mean, what needs to be done has to be done. So you cannot completely get away with the computation. So somewhere or the other, you need to invest in proper computation. And that orthogonalization procedure is, I mean, any set of vectors, n number of independent vectors, they can be made mutually orthogonal by using this process of Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization. So it involves any set of independent vectors, n number of independent vectors, they can be converted to an orthonormal basis. That is, so u1, u2 up to un, they are independent vectors. They can be converted into an orthonormal basis, q1, q2, etc. up to qn. So first thing is we normalize u1 to unit length and save it as the first orthonormal, first vector of the orthonormal basis as q1. So that is u1 divided by norm of or Euclidean length of u1. So that's just square root of sum of squares, like you compute the distance between 2 points in the coordinate geometry. So that's what it is. X minus x1, x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square plus y3 z2 minus z1 whole square, and square root of that. So distance between 2 points, except that in the one point here is base point is the origin. So it ends up with